It's the so-called revelations that are coming out in the news, open brackets, the news, close brackets, because I don't really count most of the news as news anymore and haven't for years. But revelations about what the government and their little wizards were up to with us during the last 3 years. And for me, it has crystallised in a question. These so-called revelations being swirling around us now like a I don't know, a swarm of black biting flies. Where is the outrage? Where is the outrage from the people? Why aren't people out on the streets laying siege to Parliament, demanding the removal from office of those who deliberately set out to terrify the population of this country into doing what the government wanted us to do? Where is the outrage? The other question is, what is it going to take before enough people accept that we were lied to and we were deliberately manipulated by politicians and their officials? I think the answer to that question is that the necessary reckoning cannot and will not come until more people admit to themselves that they were had, that they were duped, and they fell for it. Trust me, I had to do that. All of my life, I had broadly trusted the government of the day to have my best interests at heart. And that was regardless of whether they were Conservative or Labour or Liberal or monster raving loony. I just gave them the benefit of the doubt and assumed that underlying the political ideologies there was a determination to look out for me and mine. And when 3 years ago now the scales fell from my eyes and I realised that the opposite was true, it was embarrassing. It was humiliating. I realised, I had to go through the realisation that I had been a gullible, unquestioning fool. I make no bones about it, I was. And it makes me cringe, and it still makes me blush now when I think about how blind I was for the whole of my adult life up until 2020. But it has to be done. It has to be done. And the longer anyone goes without ripping off that filthy old band-aid, the sorer it's going to be in the end, if and when it falls off by itself. And while more and more people are noticing the stories circulating now about deliberate plans to scare the pants off people, that's the words that Matt Hancock used himself, to scare the pants off people until they complied. Make no mistake that until that moment, none of this is over, and far from it. The mainstream media, or the bulk thereof, are tending to suggest we're at the point where the wrongs are past, the wrongs are exposed, and that the time has come for, judgment. But the awful truth is that it's all still happening. The wrongdoing is not in the past tense. It's still in the present tense. The charlatans and collaborators of yesterday are trying to reinvent themselves as messengers of the truth. But the crimes in question are nowhere near being dealt with. There's talk about how people like us were censored and ridiculed, as though that's stopped. Although that's behind us now. It absolutely hasn't stopped. It's absolutely still going on right now. We still cannot freely talk about the harms done. The horror show of the care homes and the end-of-life care administered to the people in the care homes instead of treatment for a respiratory virus were still shouted down for asking questions that remain to be asked, far less answered. And the worst of the wrongdoing, which is the censorship and the silencing, is still going on. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, I have to be very careful what words I use right now, which drug brand names I do and do not mention, which respiratory infections I describe by name, for fear of the resultant content being deemed unfit for broadcast. That's still the situation in which people like me are operating. The war goes on against the worst of all of it, and that is a fact. beware distraction, as always. I note today that the government wants everyone excited about the latest promises to tackle illegal immigration in the Channel, the English Channel. Well, anyone with an ounce of awareness knows that those promises must hold no water whatsoever. The UK is still bound by the European Court of Human Rights. Brexit or no Brexit, that's a fact. All of that will continue to bind the hands of politicians making airy promises about getting on top of that situation. It's only out there, that headline is only out there today. Home Secretary Suella Braverman has only been, thrust out in front of cameras again. Trust me, as a temporary distraction from the so-called revelations about government psyops. It's no coincidence that Rishi Sunak and the rest are proclaiming that they're going to stop the illegal immigration, because they want to make everybody look away from what's coming out about Matt Hancock and the rest, and fret for a while about something else, while they rearrange those deck chairs. What we have had so far, this week of so-called revelations, barely touches the hem of revelations as far as I'm concerned. Those of us awake and paying attention have known for years that the government was playing mind games. Those narcissistic fantasists in Parliament, and that's on both sides of the House. That's Conservative, Labour, Liberals, all of them, the SNP, indulging their onanism by convincing themselves that they could treat 60-odd million people like sheep. We're still waiting. We are still waiting for the real questions to be asked about the respiratory infection in question, the one that attracts the attention of the censor bots. We're still waiting for the questions about the safety or not of the experimental gene therapies that were pushed, all but mandated, on millions of people of all ages. And if so many more people now know they were lied to, made guinea pigs for a nationwide psyop to further government objectives in relation to a respiratory infection, it's still safest not to mention on air. Why for 1 minute would those same people trust what those same characters in power are saying about Ukraine and Russia, about the Nord Stream pipeline, about the climate and alleged human impact on it? Indeed, why would you trust those characters to tell you the truth about anything at all? Why? Here's the thing. The UK Parliament and the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Parliament, they're stuffed full of MPs of all stripes, from all parties, in government and in opposition, who absolutely conspired to make all of this happen. They worked with each other as one blob to make all of this happen. They didn't do it once, they didn't do it twice, they did it over and over again. They demanded collectively earlier and harsher and longer lockdowns. They voted through ruinous furlough while countless of the self-employed and others had their livelihoods knowingly destroyed. All of it, harms to mental and physical health, the damage to children, all of it. And all the while people out here in the real world were being destroyed, those politicians knew it was all based on lies. It was lies and fear porn and propaganda shaped to, quote, scare the pants off the people. For me, this does not even begin to be over until every politician who voted for lockdown and the rest, who stood by or cheered on the demands to force experimental gene therapies on millions of people, who watched their constituents deliberately terrified to the point of destruction, committing suicide or unable to be with loved ones while they died, this does not even begin to be over until every last one of those knowingly complicit politicians, Sunak, Hunt, Gove, Johnson, Starmer and the rest, are out of office and barred from ever being in positions of authority again. Here's another thing. If more people knew, if they knew the whole truth of it, the mainstream media, the vast bulk of it, would have to shut their doors too. The newspapers, the television channels, they have the gall, the unmitigated gall, the unforgivable temerity to mug outrage at tales of psyops, psychological operations, manipulation, while it was them. It was those self-same newspapers and TV channels who took bungs from government and Bill Gates and the rest to push those scare stories in the first place. Since when? In what rational universe do the guilty parties get to stand in judgment on the crimes that they themselves committed? How does that work? So this watered down, softly drip of some chosen tidbits of what went on, I tell you what this is. It's an attempt by those collaborators to find, without us apparently noticing, the off-ramp from the road to hell that they were barrelling us all along for the last 3 years. They did this. Government came up with it, but the mainstream media wholeheartedly wrote those stories and pushed them at us relentlessly, round the clock for years. We must never forget that. You don't wait. The person that smashes all your windows or sets fire to your car, you don't go out and then listen to them say, "Who threw the stones? Who lit the matches? It was you. It was them. And we saw them do it." And now they've got the nerve to position themselves as judging what was done. That's not how it works. And more of us are awake to the fact that that will not be how it works. What was happening in Britain is only a part, a big and substantial part for those of us living here, but only a part of what was happening is still happening all across the West. It happened in every European country under the aegis of the European Union. It happened all over Scandinavia, with the honourable partial exception of Sweden. It happened all over North America. It happened all over South America. It happened everywhere. That was what made it so sinister, and frankly that was what should have made it all the more noticeable, because the powers, the leaderships in each of the countries were in lockstep. We were in lockdown and they were in lockstep. They were parroting the same language. And oh so quickly, in the midst of it all, the lockdown, which let's not forget is prison parlance and only prison parlance. Lockdowns apply to prisoners when they're getting uppity and it looks as if it might be safer for the guards to shut them in their cells before they climb up on the roofs and start throwing slates about. All of that, lockdown, everything that went with it, pervertedly provided that opportunity for them to describe it as a window of opportunity. That was part of the language that they all used. A narrow window of opportunity to build back better. You know, we were no sooner locked down than the powers that be were trying to persuade us that this was the opportunity of a lifetime to build back better. And by build back better, they meant reimagine the world in their image, to make it conform to the way that they thought the world should be. Now, if it had been happening in just one country in isolation, you might have been able to console yourselves that it was an aberration. But the fact was that it was happening all across the developed world at the same time. Everyone doing and saying the same things to us in the same moment. And so yes, we were a microcosm, an important microcosm, because this is our homeland. But it was only a part of a bigger picture. Oh yes.